Hi, I'm Billy Gwaltney, and this is the CYA Podcast. This show is for the physician who understands the importance of protecting everything you've worked so hard to achieve. Each week, I'll bring you tips and advice to help you cut through the clutter and misinformation and show you exactly what you need to preserve your income and way of life. If you're ready to achieve the peace of mind that only financial security can bring, let's get started. Welcome to today's episode of the Cover Your Assets podcast. This is Billy Gwaltney, your host, and as always, I'm really happy to be with you today. Today's episode is about the big gaps in employer long-term disability policies. I spend a lot of time in working with physicians and helping them secure private specialty own occupation disability coverage across the country. We talk about employer coverage a lot. It comes up because typically an employer, especially if it's a larger health system or educational institution, they'll have a group long-term disability policy that can look good on paper, and as part of the benefits package, you're required to take it. And there can be, an assumption that all coverage is the same. So if my employer is providing coverage, then I don't need any more private coverage, or maybe I don't need any at all. Especially when you look at it on paper and see the way it's wordsmithed in the communication material that you see as an employee. And it's important to go through what these differences are because they're significant. They have everything to do with contract language and how it's worded, and very little to do with who your employer is. It's nothing against your employer. The way this marketplace works is your employers are required to cover unhealthy employees with the same policy that covers healthy employees. They're all covered under the same coverage or the same policy. This is called adverse selection. To an insurance company, they do everything they can to avoid adverse selection if they can help it. And because this adverse selection is unavoidable, what insurance companies do to offset that additional risk of having to cover everyone regardless of health is water down the definitions for the policy that's covering these employees. And so how they operate at the time of claim is going to be significantly different. And I don't mean to say this to just be the bearer of bad news if you're required to accept group LTD. I'm saying this as a reminder of why it's so important to have the private specialty coverage. And I'm not just saying this because I'm an insurance guy. I would say this to anybody, regardless of who the broker is. It's important to have a well-structured specialty own occupation disability policy that goes with you throughout your career so that you can have that in addition to the group LTD policy. So the way they work is at the time of claim, if you did meet the definition of disability for both your private coverage and your group policy, then you would collect from both. They do not offset each other, okay? However, at the time you're becoming an employee or looking to add private coverage based on your attending salary, the group LTD amount factors into how much private coverage you can increase by. And sometimes it is possible for someone to kind of get lured into thinking that the group LTD is so attractive that there's no need for additional private coverage. It might be 60% up to $20,000 per month or $15,000 per month, which to a recently graduated trainee sounds like a lot of money. And it is. The question is it going to pay? And a lot of times it doesn't. We unfortunately do have clients on claim that get paid from their private specialty policy. They get paid as expected. And in a lot of cases, they never see a nickel from their employer policy. They just don't meet the threshold for being disabled. So I want to take a couple minutes and just go through what the differences are. This is a kind of an overview. Happy to discuss it with you in more detail if you would like. But again, because of adverse selection, there are significant problems or gaps associated with group employer long-term disability policies. And again, if you're disabled, you're going to notice a significant difference. First, the private coverage that I broker, and if you're a client already, you have this, provides a true specialty own occupation definition of disability, which means that if you're unable to practice your specialty, the specific duties you were doing at the time of claim, then you are totally disabled and you can earn an unlimited income doing a different job. Okay. And your current job is defined as the duties you were doing at the time of claim, and a different job, it can be in the medical field and it could be any other duties outside of what you were previously doing. Employer long-term disability policies do not have that definition. What's critical to know is that this is true even if the marketing piece or the summary blurb you get from HR or the broker for the employer policy calls it specialty specific or own occupation. What they mean by that is dramatically different than what I just described. What they mean by that at best is going to be a Google search of MD duties, which might be 50 duties. And the threshold is being unable to do those duties, the material parts of 50 duties, which is a much different threshold and requires a much more severe disability compared to the half dozen or so duties you were doing likely at the time of claim. And so if you're a surgeon and can't do surgery, but you can do telemedicine, then the group policy is going to be, it's just going to get muddy. So I can't stress this enough because I've seen it happen. And forgive me, I take this serious. It's like we're going around using the same term, but they have very different meanings. It's like we're using the term blue. We're calling something a color blue, and I've got dark blue in mind, and you've got sky blue in mind. But we're just saying blue, and we think we mean the same thing. But then you go paint the room blue, or I paint it my blue, right, which is going to be much darker. And you walk in the room thinking it's going to be this light blue, and you go, wait a minute, that is not what I had in mind. Well, it's blue, right? It's blue. You go, no, that's a different kind of blue. We meant different things. So we're using the same term, but we have very different definitions for that term. And that's what happens in the own occupation terminology that gets thrown around by different insurance companies and different brokers. And what they mean by that is dramatically different than what I mean and what is meant by the broker, the true specialty coverage. There are only a handful of companies that do that. And you have to usually go through medical screening to get it. You're not going to find it in an employer marketplace. I don't care what they call it. I've never seen it. I've never seen a physician, as of now, in my years of doing this, be able to get a true own occupation disability policy with no gaps in it from an employer without having to go through some type of medical screening. There's always a catch to it. And so just the devil's in the details for that. The second is the discount side broker that are on the policy that you have. Those are permanent. The premium can never change. The definitions can never change. The policy can never be canceled. But in an employer policy, they can increase the cost if you pay a portion. They can change the definitions. They can get rid of the policy. So the coverage that I broker, the true specialty coverage, is individual coverage. It means, again, they can never cancel the policy. You can walk away anytime, but they cannot. They can never change the definitions, and the rate is fixed. An employer policy can be taken away at any time. Okay, if they decide they don't want to do it, they just get rid of it, and you get a notice, and there's nothing you can do. The AMA policy is a group policy where if the AMA or the insurance company providing it decides they don't want to do it anymore, they can take it away. It's a group certificate. You have no control, and that's an important distinction. Also, the coverage in a true specialty, properly designed true specialty contract does not require a period of total disability payments prior to activating the residual or partial disability benefits. So you can be partially disabled, receive a residual or partial benefit from day one after meeting the elimination period without ever having had to be totally disabled first. A lot of times an employer policy to receive residual benefits requires a period of total disability first. The AMA policy certificate, a group certificate requires that. That's an out clause. You don't want that in your policy. Also, the private specialty coverage, if designed properly, will include a long-term recovery benefit that pays if you medically recover from a disability and go back to work. But when you go back to work, your income doesn't recover. That happens a lot. If you're a surgeon, you may not be able to do as many cases after you've been out on claim for 2 or 3 years. You may not be as productive. That's true of a hospitalist. It's true of an oncologist. It's true of a psychiatrist, true of a surgeon. I mean, the days of production-driven pay, a recovery benefit is vital. And so the policies that we broker, the top contracts, they're going to have that recovery benefit in there. I've never seen an employer LTD policy that has a recovery benefit. Never seen it. They may provide a 6-month return to work incentive or maybe up to a year, but that's it. And even there are strings attached to that. So the bottom line is an employer LTD policy could be much more difficult and is likely to be much more difficult to collect from at claim time. If you are disabled or someone's disabled and forced to rely solely or primarily on an employer policy, that would be painful from a financial standpoint. That a significant number of bankruptcies come from medical events that happen and there's no revenue coming in as expenses keep coming in and actually get higher. It's obviously your decision, just a word to the wise as you consider these options. And again, I've had other podcast episodes where I talk about the gaps in employer coverage and the difference between private specialty coverage and group policies. But I wanted to share this updated version for particularly new attendings, people that are making decisions about benefits and decisions that have a significant impact because your income is much higher and the stakes are much higher now. And so just understand that, first of all, an employer can never require you to get rid of private specialty coverage. Okay, it's completely independent of who your employer is and whatever coverage they have. And I just want to caution you not to get lured into a lower cost. It might cost $50 a month or something for the group LTD if it's voluntary. Most of our clients opt out of the voluntary portion and get that through their own private specialty coverage, which is more expensive, but it's incredibly more valuable. And so you get what you pay for. So don't get lured into that and perhaps what might look good on paper, a high benefit cap of $20,000 a month or something. Keep in mind that a group LTD policy benefits are also taxable typically. And so that, depending on what state you live in, that a large percentage of that is going to be taken away in income taxes. Your private specialty coverage is not taxed. And so it goes much further. Bottom line, again, there's a big, big difference in how group LTD policies and private specialty coverage are going to be handled and how the impact is going to have and just how it's going to likely turn out at the time of a claim. So hope you found this helpful. Be happy to discuss your situation in more detail if you would like. Feel free to text me to arrange a conversation, 704-270-2376. Again, 704-270-2376. Until we meet again, this is Billy Gwaltney. Thank you as always for your time.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.